Thank you, Vanya, and welcome everyone to Cooking for a Healthy Heart. Oh, sorry, that one's not until February 15th. How about welcome to Cooking for a Happy Heart or Cooking for a Sweetheart? You're all sweethearts. I consider you to be Cupids because you share your love and you connect people together partly through your food. So today what I have is some fun ideas for a cake and some decorations that you'll enjoy. This is a vertical layer cake, as you know, if you read the flyer, but this is a particularly fun cake to surprise people with if you want, if they don't know, because it looks regular, but then when you serve it, can we see it? I have my husband is our camera person today, and he can see and not hear, and I can hear and not see. But here you wind up with a cake with all these layers. How fun is that? It's interesting to me that you definitely want to set the cake vertically on the plate because psychologically to me, it's really different when I look at the cake lying down on the plate, like we often put a cake. I don't immediately do, huh? Wait a minute, something's different about that. So I recommend when you do it, you have this lovely vertical cake. And today I'm going to show you how to do that. It's really simple. It really is a crafts project more than baking. I'm just going to set this back in the fridge. It is a cake that needs to be cut when it's cold because it's very tender and you don't want it to squish. So that actually can be a little bit of an issue. So what I recommend is if you're trying to surprise your friends that you're serving it to, you cut it and let them see it and then go make some tea or make some coffee or milk the cow or something so that you take a little time for it to warm up. You could also garnish your plate with a few raspberries or strawberries or something if you like. I like raspberries, as you might already know, with chocolate, and they're kind of heart-shaped for Valentine's Day. How fun is that? Okay, what I'm going to do today is show you how to assemble the cake and show you a few really simple decorations, because if I can do them, you can do them, and then talk about lots of variations of how to do it. Now, hopefully you got or will get the recipes for the cake and the frosting that I sent along to the Retirement Association. You don't, of course, have to use those recipes, and we'll talk about with the variations. A couple notes on the recipes. This is a basic vanilla sponge cake and a delicious chocolate cream cheese frosting. The cake you actually make in two 10.5 by 15.5 pans. And a lot of people might not have those. That's a typical jelly roll pan size. And we'll talk about what to do if you don't do that. If you do have one pan, just a quick note, as I said in the recipe, that you can bake one layer at a time. Normal people don't have two of those pans. I actually went out about 40 years ago when I got this recipe and got a second cheap pan so I could make this at one time. But you can make one layer at a time, finish cooking it, and then do the second layer. The main leavening in a sponge cake is the air you beat into the eggs, into the egg whites. So you want to move along promptly when you do it, but it only bakes for about 15 minutes, so you can get through 2 layers quickly. My note of interest on the frosting, it only has 4 ingredients: butter, cream cheese, chocolate, which you melt, and powdered sugar. The cream cheese and the butter should be close to room temperature. If they're cold and you beat them in the bowl, especially if you have a metal bowl like I do, they'll chill the bowl. When you beat in melted chocolate, which you've let cool a little bit, if the bowl's cold, it immediately all the chocolate sticks to the bowl and doesn't go into the frosting, and you just lose the chocolate. You can't even lick it off the bowl. So that's my main warning on those recipes. If you have any questions on the recipes, let's do that at the end of our time. Okay, and why would you bother to do all this to make this multi-layer cake? Just for fun. There was one I saw online, a version of a vertical layer cake, and one person in the comments wrote, "But why? It's just fun and it's pretty. So what I did this morning was bake this cake. This is really a one cake recipe, but you do it in 2 pans, so it's really thin layers. And what that does is allow you to wind up with all of these, which looks rather elegant, I think. It's really a sponge roll rolled up and on its side. I'm not going to make 7 layers and line them up. I'm going to have them go across the page like that. Okay. So to show you a fun tool also, have you seen these silicone covers? These are covers that fit over a bowl, anything with a smooth edge. They come off immediately and they're great. I use them all the time. Have them in lots of sizes, have little ones that just big enough to fit on a cup. One's bigger than the one you just saw. I recommend them highly. Another fun tool is this handy guy, which holds a bowl on the counter so it doesn't slip. This one is called a stabilizer. Ha ha, very funny, those Canadians. And it helps the bowl not move. Now, normally I would make the cake and make the frosting pretty rapidly and do it. And this frosting has been sitting around for a while, so it is a little thick. I even added a little milk to try to thin it out a bit. So what I'm going to try to do is frost the 2 cakes and trying to do it relatively evenly because you'd like them to look like each other from the side when you get it all lined up. Another one of my favorite tools is my little spreader. I use this thing all the time. Now, some recipes for vertical cakes tell you to cut the cake first and then frost it, and some you frost and then you cut it. Do whatever you want. It really doesn't matter. So this is kind of thick here. And one nice thing about all these layers of cake and frosting also is that you wind up with a lot of frosting in the cake. And to me, that's the way cake should be. Oh, I see helpful husband coming around, showing off, showing off the pans here. Vanna White, eat your heart out here. And of course, you can see from the cake itself that that's the size of the pan. It is interesting when you make a sponge cake because it cooks in such a short time that it really doesn't have a chance to spread out in the pan as it's baking. So it's going to come out pretty much the way you put it in there. So you do try to be very careful, get it all the way into the corners as you're doing it because it's not going to melt into them. And this one is so very thin and all over my fingers. This actually does take a lot of frosting. I'm going to have only a little bit of frosting on the top of the cake because I've got so much going into the middle of it. Lob some more on there. This frosting is one of the components of one of my favorite chocolate things, by the way. Part of the reason I wanted to give you this recipe is if you make a batch of brownies, I make my favorite fudge brownies, and then put a layer of this frosting on top of them thickly, and then put a layer of ganache on top of that and serve it in very small pieces. It is an elegant torte and it's absolutely delicious. A little more frosting. Maybe a little hand washing before I go on. Now I've got one piece there that broke apart, so that's going to be an issue when I try to piece the cake together. So either I could leave it off completely, or I could have a cake trying to hold itself together there. I may go for it, and it's just going to have breaks in it.
Quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
You're taking questions from Rosemary. She says, can you show us the pans that you're using for the cakes?
Okay, Jim will come back here with good. Can you show us the pans you're using for the cake? Jim did that. He's coming back with them again.
Yes, and then from Ron, hi Debbie, where did you get the silicone covers?
The silicone covers, here's the pans. Can you see them? It's Jim in camera.
Great.
You're in camera. Great. Thank you. Let me go rinse my fingers. The silicone covers I've seen in baking shops, something like Sur La Table. Of course, they're on Amazon. I saw them in a gift shop in Carlsbad recently. So they're around. I'll show you a few more sizes just for fun. They come in other designs like this attractive little flower, and I've got them this small. Okay, now hopefully when you're doing this cake, you're going to cut it into 4 long strips on each one, and hopefully you're going to get them the same size because you're going to turn them on their side, and that determines the height of the cake. So you really do want them to be the same size as much as possible. If you're a very neat person, now with this winds up being about 10 inches across for my 10.5-inch cake. So if I do a 2.5 inches, mark them. If you're very official, you would probably mark this with a toothpick or something on each end so you know where to cut. That's one way to do it. Another is to eyeball it. I saw a recipe online the other day where somebody had very neatly taken a long piece of parchment paper, which is kind of heavy, folded it so they had this nice long edge, and they held it up on the cake and then ran it down the side. And I thought that was pretty clever because it gives you an edge to follow along. This particular frosting is a little sticky, so it's going to, this one I'm just going to try. Maybe try eyeballing. But it's worth a moment to try to get your sizes pretty close to right. This one is definitely narrower. That's very interesting. So I'm going to eyeball that one. So I just cut it into 4 strips. And it's going to be kind of sticky. Now this cake is actually pretty user-friendly. If you have ever made a jelly roll, normally in the instructions, it will tell you when it comes out of the oven, you turn it onto a paper towel, onto a cloth towel that you've put sugar onto to keep it from sticking. And this one you really don't need to normally. I did today because I was going to have it sitting around for hours, a couple hours before I used it. And I think that helped today. This one, you can see it's kind of gonna eyeball this.
A few questions.
Yes, ma'am.
And from Rosemary, how long do the covers last that you're using?
The silicone covers?
Yes.
We've had them for years. They're heavy. They're permanent pieces of your kitchen. So they aren't a thin silicone. They're a regular heavy item. In fact,
And then,
Jim,
No, go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Okay. Jim put a nail inside the cabinet that's down here to hang a few of them because they have a little hanging hook on them. So we just hang them up on a nail because where do you store all these things you have in your kitchen?
That's useful. And then do you have any suggestions for the kind of knife that you want to use while cutting, or just whatever works?
Whatever you have, use a knife. It doesn't have to be the big long one like I just did because I'm really only using the tip. So you're ready to make your cake roll. So take a piece of it and just one of your 8 strips. Now that you have 8 strips, and you start rolling it up. And if it cracks, it's okay. Doesn't really matter. So I'm just trying to roll it and keep it fairly snug because if you think about it, that's the inside of the cake. Then I'm going to take the second piece and just go on to the end here, kind of try to line it up. It's no big deal. Look at it. Okay, I got it lined up, and roll up the next one. You don't want a lot of gaps because then you don't have your cake there. By the time you've done like 2, you can go ahead and put it vertically on your cake roll. So there you see, you have a cake. Now, if you want to make a mini one, you can make a couple of cakes out of one recipe, and I've done that. They don't have as many layers, but they're fun and they're a good size, maybe for a small group or to give away. I did a dinner for 4 and did, I think, a third of the cake batter. Okay, then I'm just going to continue to roll these babies on here until I'm done. Now I didn't, oh, I did not do that one very neatly. That is not even close on the height. So I am going to cut that off. That's what I get for eyeballing it here. And you can. I've seen some recipes where people are chill it and then trim the end off the whole thing at once and make sure it's level. That's another way to play this game. Fine for today's purposes. And then just continue to take these things. Of course, these are going to stick to the cake because they've got frosting. And one just broke here, and then I just repiece it. The odds of it showing when you cut the cake are not that big, so you can have some care but not worry too much. Yesterday when I was making the cake that you have cut there, I had a bad day at the cake and I didn't think it was going to be all right inside, and I cut it this morning and it was fine. Oh. The cake is sneaking into view, apparently. Not quite into view, so you can't. I love having my assistant. This is lovely. Yeah, he says. And it's not critical. Now, this, where it broke near the end, as you can see, it doesn't have to be every inch of the cake. It's more important to have the width than it is to have the length. So I can just take that and cut it off as I go and consider that to have worked. Now, you may have this idea, you're thinking, well, that's not round, it's a spiral. It is. It's not really a round cake. But by the time you frost it, you can hide the spiral and it looks like a round cake. So that's why it's not much work. So this is actually the cake. I'm going to leave off that piece and Jim will be happy. And then we frost it and it looks like a cake. I've got to rinse a layer off my hands. If you really did a neat job on the cake as you went along, you could, I suppose, not frost the top at all. It would really show it was a bullseye. I'd rather have frosting. And as I said, it depends on whether you want to surprise people, but that's an option. Okay, just stirring the frosting to soften it a bit. I'll go ahead and tell you what I think would be an alternate frosting, which would be ganache. Even simpler. This is 4 ingredients. Ganache would be 2 ingredients, and you'd have your cake frosted easily. Now, something else this bowl holder can do, am I on camera when I do that? Besides holding something firm, you can be pouring and stirring at the same time, which is really nice. You can do that by just putting a wet washcloth on the counter. You don't have to have this, but you can't do this with a wet washcloth, is have the bowl at an angle and be stirring. So it's a really handy device. It's also smaller on the underside for little smaller bowls, and this size handles pretty big bowls. There's my favorite spreader. So I won't do all the frosting of the cake today for you to watch, but you see the idea that here we here we are hiding the top of the bullseye and piecing it together. I am going to decorate this a bit. And when you have finished this cake, you do need to chill it because you can see this tender cake going by, and it is too soft to serve it the way it is. The original recipe for this cake comes with a frosting that has raw egg in it, and I try not to do that these days. So I went hunting for a different frosting idea to put on it. And a couple of months ago, I tried one that was just a frosting recipe I wanted to try sometime. And it was nice and creamy when it was room temperature. And when it was cold, it was so hard that I couldn't cut the cake without crushing it. So I had to use a different frosting. I'm just going to do the top for now so I can do a decoration for you. I'll do the rest of that later. Just a second. Is that's your husband, your question or someone else's question? Okay. My husband has a question of what is on the stove. That is something for a couple decorations I'm going to show you. Of some samples of decorations. I want to show you a couple really simple ideas. I went looking for simple decorating ideas for more of this kind of thing I'm about to do with some cookbooks from my library and online. And what I'm doing is so simple that it's not even in those cookbooks. Those cookbooks start a level above this. So that means you can do it. Okay, what I have here is I made some white chocolate ganache, which is white chocolate and cream. And I made it pretty thick because white chocolate tends to be pretty thin. So this is the equivalent of 4 parts of white chocolate to 3 parts of cream. Now here is my elegant decorator bag, also known as a small sealing baggie, which you can do. So you load it with whatever you want to use. And then you snip the end off, cut it a little smaller than you think you're going to, and you have a decorating bag. So I'm going to see how well this goes because I'm not very neat. And I am going to try to pipe, as it were, some circles on top. I'm going to start with a little, pretty big circle. There's a mess. And cut, because what happens is I cut it, the hole, a little too big. But for demonstration purposes today, that will do. Well, the concept here is that I have to rinse my finger. So I'm going to draw in here by pulling the knife away from the circles. Now, if that had been neater, you would see what was going on. Okay. What I'm doing is making markings that are basically going to divide this into 12, because I thought that would be nice if I wanted to serve 12 pieces of cake. So at the 12 and 6 o'clock, I'm pulling out. At the 3 and 9, I'm pulling in, and then I'm just going to alternate. So since that one went in, this one goes out and in, and that one goes out. So I go in and out. Opposite of that one's pulling that way. So I go out and in and out. So I'm going to try not to tilt this too far. So what we have is a really pretty design by just doing that. Now, if lift it up. Okay, can we see? Okay, so what we have is a pretty design, and if you do the piping more neatly, you'll see it even better. If I were doing it on a smaller item, which is what I'm going to do here, if I were doing it on a small cake, I wouldn't do that many divisions because it's awfully busy that way, I think. Okay, I'm going to show you a couple of other ideas for decorating. Now, the only one of these that I've seen, other than in an ancient Betty Crocker cookbook where I got these, is a spider web. There's a variant on what you just saw me do that makes a spider web. And you see that a lot of places when it's, where's my little guy? It, right there. What did I do with my little spreader? Okay. I'm doing here the equivalent of pretending this is frosting so that we can do a couple of other designs. You don't have to use, thank you. You don't have to use ganache, of course. You could be doing any sauces, can be pretty liquid. These days for designs, there's so many things done in coffee. I don't drink coffee, but if you see the designs that baristas do, you can do the same kind of thing on a cake or cupcakes if you're going really small. And then you get a lot more ideas. Just getting lined up here to do a couple different ones with my messy bag of white chocolate ganache. And to pull the lines through, you can use anything you want, depending on how big it is. Okay, so if I did the 8 slice version of what I did before, it's easier because I would just do out in every direction. Not some of my neatest work, but just to give you the idea. So for that, oops, sorry, I did that in reverse. Okay, not doing that one. I did the lines the wrong way. Okay, this one I'll do the spider web. And depending on how big the item is you have, you see how neatly you want to do it. Okay, so for the spider web, you pull them all out because that's what a spider web looks like. And you don't have to do an even number around. A spider wouldn't necessarily. You may want to do a different number of them. So we'll be able to see this? Yeah, okay, sort of, kind of. The next thing I'm going to show you is, where are my other ones? The scallops. You can do a couple of curved lines, not across the whole surface, but something like across the bottom. And then take your toothpick or whatever and pull it in one direction. Basic idea there. And then the other one, which probably won't work so well today with my unneat bag, is to do some circles. Just do some dots around the edge. Yeah, this is a little bit too soft to work well as I go quickly. And this is how you do the hearts, you see, because you just pull through a circle and, and it makes a heart. Okay, You can see I made a mess with these are a little too big, but you get the idea. It's just a heart is a circle with a line through it, just to show you another heart. Just pull through and you've got a heart. Okay. Back to the washing the fingers. Baking is quite a use of hot water these days.
So Debbie, with Valentine's Day
Yes.
coming up, I know that people will go red and white and pink. Do you have any recommended dyes that you use, colors, and where would you purchase them?
Okay, that's a good lead in. I'm going to get to that. Haha. Because in my idea about what are variations on this, one of the things is colors. Now, what you want to have on the cake is some contrast so that you can see the layers or you can see the decoration. Now, my mind, of course, goes to chocolate cake with white frosting. Of course, that's the most logical one to me. What about for spring, especially the idea of pastels? It could be a chocolate cake with white frosting. I'm also thinking white cake with pastel colored frosting. And what I would do to make a pastel frosting without using artificial colors or flavors is to use freeze-dried fruit ground up. For example, this is freeze-dried raspberries, and you can get them at Target. You can get them at Whole Food for twice the cost in their brand, but you could also get them there and you just grind them up and you stir that into frosting. A tablespoon or two into a cup of frosting, white frosting, dyes it and also gives it the fruit flavor. You can get strawberry, you can get mango, you can get blueberry, and I think that would be really pretty. Another thing that can be seasonal for this cake would be to do, for example, in the fall, do a pumpkin cake with chocolate frosting or with vanilla frosting. And you'd have with the chocolate frosting, you'd have the oranges and browns. And then what you see for Halloween a lot is have a chocolate frosting and do that spider web decoration on the top. And that works really well too. Other variations I've thought about for the cake are, excuse me, what if you put some jam on some of the layers or jam and frosting? Or what if you used two different colors of frosting and maybe traded off which strip you put? They're not exactly neat. You'd probably have a Mondrian painting kind of strip going on. What else did I have for ideas for contrast? If you use a ganache frosting, I would make it a little thinner than standard ganache. Standard ganache, you melt equal weights of dark chocolate and cream. I would put more cream than chocolate, like 16 ounces of cream to 14 ounces of chocolate or something. Make it a little bit thinner so it'll cut, because this cake can be a little bit hard to cut. Oh, another use for the powdered freeze-dried fruit, if you wanted, is just to sift some on the top of a vanilla frosting. And for that, the recommendation I've heard is 2 parts of fruit for 1 part of powdered sugar. And I've used these raspberries ground up to make raspberry chocolate chip cookies, and they make a really interesting color in the food. They work really well, and they have a lot of flavor because the entire ingredient is just the fruit. That's all that's in it. Those were most of my other thoughts for varieties. And this cake then also freezes well, which is a good thing, because the one I'm making today is going to go in the freezer until I have a big get together, because I'm seldom have that many people to serve a cake to. So what are your questions about the recipe, about what's going on here, about how good it is to eat, seeing how fun that is? Other things, other pans, that's what I'm supposed to talk about. You could make this in a single layer. You don't have to have 2 layers. You could make a regular one. You can't cut it horizontally. That's not going to work. But you would just have a thicker cake without as many layers. I think what's fun about this is because it has so many layers. If you had 1 layer, you could cut it into 4 strips. You could cut it into 3. I would probably cut it into 3, and that makes a pretty cake, which is a little over 3 inches high and smaller around. Online, I've seen that a current thing seems to be cutting one cake in half, and it makes a really tall, narrow cake, which is very dramatic. But when I think about it, I think, how would you cut it? The slices would be a very awkward size. The cake would be fun to look at, but then it'd be really hard to eat, I think, because you'd wind up with a couple of really big pieces. If you were to make a pumpkin version of this, I would recommend you don't use just a standard pumpkin jelly roll cake recipe, because those tend to be very spongy. When I was signing up to do this presentation, I said I could do it in October or January or February, and I would have tried the pumpkin. I found a recipe that said it was a fluffy version of a sponge cake, and I think that would work better. This cake is pretty fluffy for a sponge cake, and that means it doesn't fight you back quite so much when you try to line it up here and roll it up. So what questions do you have for me today?
That was fantastic, Debbie. Thank you so much for giving us all of those tips. Yes, so questions, I'll read them from the chat if any more come in. I'm not seeing any now, so I believe it's also fine if they unmute themselves to ask. Would that be fine with you?
It's fine with me.
Great.
There are no questions.
I think you covered quite a lot, and they read questions throughout. Oh, and yeah, Rosemary was wondering where you got the freeze-dried fruit. Target, is that correct?
Yeah, that one is a I'm thinking of, I think it's their own brand. Yeah, it's their own brand, the Good and Gather. And I've seen a different brand, as I said, at Whole Foods, because that's where I found it first, and another store that Whole Foods-ish had them. Where would you find them? I found them around things like the dried fruit, the apricots and the prunes and that sort of thing, because that's a question, where do you find them? Because some store might put them in the produce section. So they're very expensive. This whole thing is an ounce and a quarter. Interesting. And they're fun just to eat. What next?
I just want to say thanks, Debbie. Hi, it's Donna.
Hi, Donna.
Hi, sweetie. And I just want to say thanks. This was so fun. I really enjoyed it. And I am definitely going to do it. So I think that's great. You know, it's so fun when you see something that's like, yes, I want to do that. That looks, you just know that when you serve it to people, they're just going to be blown away. So thanks so much. Really fun.
You're welcome. Isn't that a fun look? It's just a different way to do it. And it tastes delicious whether or not you did it this way or you just had a plain sponge cake. But this is an elegant way to do it.
Yeah. Very clever.
How long do you think it would take your first time trying to decorate these wonderful cakes? And then once you get the hang of it and are a pro like you, how long do you think it would take then?
To decorate? Well, I would take longer than this because I would do it more neatly. But you saw how simple that is. Now, what I would do is cut an even smaller piece. I virtually never decorate things. And I very seldom make cakes because I'm seldom serving a lot of people sitting down at one time to do it together. I'm the take cookies somewhere and pass them out kind of person. So I'm not experienced in that. But as you could see when I did the messy version, these decorations are so simple and they're really quick. So that doesn't take long. All you need to do is get to the frosting before it hardens, if it's a frosting that's going to firm up, and just do your little circles or make little designs. And it'll only take you a minute. It's really interesting. Just trying to be neat as you do it. Another example, for example, is just draw some lines across the cake, and that can be a round one or not. And then just take your toothpick and go through it in different directions, and that makes fun chevrons. And it looks like you're very artistic.
Great. A question from Paula. What kind of chocolate do you recommend for cooking?
Unsweetened or something that's sweetened. Like this cake is unsweetened chocolate. I buy chocolate by the kilo, shipped over state lines from my favorite Chocosphere company in Portland, up near Portland, Oregon. And it's Guittard brand, which is a California brand of chocolate. And I buy their unsweetened. I'm going to grab it out of the cabinet here, because they sell their chocolate in discs, which is what I absolutely love. It comes in discs like this. You never have to chop it up because it's already in little wafers. I also buy one of their other percentages to be my daily eating chocolate. They're 61. It comes in 64% and 72 and 58 and 55. And I live on the 61%, and I bake with the discs. I have seen in the grocery store lately that a couple companies have started making unsweetened chocolate chips of the regular old chocolate chip companies. And that's really handy because, once again, you don't have to cut up squares like I grew up with the baker's chocolate from the grocery store, and you have to cut it up, and that's a pain in the neck. And for the lazy person, this is good chocolate, and it melts really easily. Another company that sells, I think, the unsweetened is King Arthur Flour. You could check them online.
That's great. Thank you. Fran, you had a question?
I have an addition. She mentioned Portland. We learned from that little chocolate shop in Portland, sipping chocolate. And I've discovered a good brand at Trader Joe's.
Tell us more, Fran.
They serve them in they serve the sipping chocolate in little teeny tiny little, I guess, like demi-tasse cups. They're like the size of a shot glass.
And it's really thick.
I ordered their sampler platter, and I think we had like 4 different little flavors. Just phenomenal. We thought our daughter-in-law was crazy for dragging us through Portland looking for this stupid little place, but it was wonderful. This better be good.
I went to a store in Pasadena some years ago, about 10 years ago, went up there for something, and there was a store that had the sipping chocolates. It's particularly big in South America, for example, and Spain, to have those rich sipping chocolates that are thick and absolutely luscious.
Ooh.
So Debbie, I'm wondering, when you eat something that's so chocolatey, what would you recommend drinking alongside it?
Well,
that knew about the place. I think it was called CAO.
Okay. For drinking, my 2 standard drinks in life go perfectly with chocolate. One is water and one is non-fat milk.
Thank you. I was curious just because, I was thinking, would you do hot chocolate? Probably not, along with more chocolate. Okay.
It's very rich, and you only need a little bit of it.
The sipping chocolates, yes.
Yes.
Now, if you like hot chocolate or you like sipping chocolate, go for it. Just don't count on sleeping that night.
Maybe that's why I had some cocoa last night. Some Starbucks. I also buy the Starbucks powdered cocoa from like Vaughn's, and I had trouble sleeping last night, and I had a cup of that before I went to bed. Maybe that's why.
That's why it's caffeine.
The caffeine. Oh my gosh.
Which is why the ancient Aztecs ate chocolate, and the soldiers could march all day on chocolate.
Oh. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of thanks in the chat. Your presentation was inspiring. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, so we really do appreciate you giving us this time to present this, Debbie. And I will be making something along this kind of decorating and cake for my husband on Valentine's Day. So thank you for that.
Oh, that's so sweet. And thank you for Vanya for setting this up. And I hear that Mel was also helping out today. And for everybody for coming, because this is so fun for me. I appreciate it. And go out there and be Cupids and spread your love.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us. We will see you at the next one.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.